Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name is Brian, and in this video, I wanted to go over a review of the core box for Damian Ravencroft, who brings along the keyword Witness. Now, if Wyrd weren't busy enough with all the Burning Man stuff where they're basically doubling all the masters in the game and including new dual keyworded models, they had to one-up themselves by creating completely new masters that are in the Malifaux world. And Damian was one that was released over Gen Con, had a couple teasers prior to that, but if you were attending Gen Con, I don't know if Wyrd does online orders, because I had gotten my set from Gen Con specifically, but he was available for that time period, so a lot of folks have their hands on him already. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the specific things that are unique with Damian Ravencroft. So before we get started on talking about Damian's core box specifically, I wanted to talk about one of the unique things that he ends up bringing that's kind of new to the game that I have a feeling we'll see in other places coming up here soon too. But that's going to be this new concept called the configuration. So the configuration essentially is almost, it's kind of like a fate hand that exists outside of your fate deck and your actual hand that you're holding in the game. You can add cards to it based on certain abilities that are attached to models with the witness keyword. We might have that happen in the story keyword later, but essentially there are ways that models within Damian's crew can interact with the configuration in terms of adding cards or triggering off certain abilities or utilizing them to cheat fate. But one of the base rules for the configuration is this conduit rule that states witness models in this crew gain the following ability: conduit. If 3 or more cards in your configuration share a suit, this model may add that suit to the duel's total. So the conduit's max size is equal to your hand size. So typically, if you're paying a lot of attention to the suits within the configuration, you could probably get 2 of them baked in to any triggers that would happen to be present on any of your witness models. So that's one of the things that the conduit is really good for. Not having to worry about trying to find those suits for triggers is really nice, because you don't have to you only have to worry about hitting your numbers and not so much trying to find those specific suits. It kind of eliminates one of the more tricky parts of trying to play a crew that really likes some of the triggers that it has going off. So as we get into the models more, we'll kind of understand more how this configuration gets interacted with. But I think if you're starting out with a Damian crew or trying to dive in, it's really important that you understand how the configuration works, because it's a big part of his gameplay plan. Damian's Witness core box is comprised of Damian Ravencroft, the puzzle box, which is his summonable totem, along with his henchman, Bellaventine Thorpe, and then 3 new minions, the Dabblers. So starting the box off with Damian Ravencroft Aspirant, we have a Defense 5, Willpower 7 master that's living with Movement 5 and Size 2. The abilities on the card, I'm going to shuffle these around a little bit so they make more sense within line of the configuration. One of the keywords that is on most witness models is this repository ability that states when this model activates, it may add a card from its control hand to the configuration to draw a card. So this is one of the ways, probably the most common way, you're going to be getting cards into the configuration, and it helps you shuffle, or not shuffle, but cycle through your deck a little bit. So you do have to have a card in your hand in order to add something to the repository and then draw a card. It doesn't work the other way around, where you can just draw a card and then throw it into the config if you have no cards in your hand. So repository is kind of your main mode for beefing up the configuration. Along with that, there's an ability called Memories of the Yellow Crypt. This states that after a card of value 9 or greater is added to your configuration, a friendly witness model within line of sight gains shielded +1 or may move up to 2 inches. So another fun thing with Damian is that you can bank these configuration cards. You don't have to get punished for putting a higher card in there. You know, like, you kind of want to have some high cards in your hand with him so that you're able to cheat in the duels that you want to cheat in. But just your opponent knowing that you have big cards within your configuration kind of makes them think a lot before they try to do things. They kind of understand which battles or which duels they're going to lose and which ones they're not going to. You kind of have a lot more control over that particular situation, but putting these big cards in there can give Damian's crew a little bit more of a boost, or a boost as far as getting up the table, or make sure that they stay alive for a little bit longer with getting that shielded bonus. Along with that, Witness in Between is one of the rules that I was thinking of as I was talking about the configuration, but didn't actually get to. So this states when a friendly Witness model would cheat Fate, it can discard a card to cheat Fate with a card in your configuration. And this kind of explains why I was talking about having big cards in the configuration to win your duels. Damian doesn't need any kind of line of sight or anything or range requirements for this. You just have to have your Witness keyword, and then you can cheat from the configuration itself. So your opponent has to really muscle through some high value cards when you're sitting with something in the configuration to make sure that they can try and burn through that, or it just kind of changes the way they play because they know a lot more information, but you kind of have this extra hand on the side. Damian also brings an ability called Superiority Complex, which reduces any damage this model would suffer from enemies with conditions by 1. And then finally, on the front side of his card is Maintain Order. If this model is the crew's leader, after an enemy model within line of sight declares an action that it already declared this activation, it must discard a card or the action fails. So with Maintain Order, this ability can't be overlooked with him. It really puts an elbow on your opponent's activation and resources. As the Damian player, I feel like it's very important to understand that the initial action that model takes doesn't need to be within his line of sight. If they happen to take like a move action outside of line of sight and then move into Damian's line of sight, they will have to discard a card in order to declare that move action again, because they have already declared that action this turn. It's just one of the nuances about Maintain Order that can get you if you're not paying attention. And between your opponent needing to be really aggressive about cheating against you with known information from the configuration, Maintain Order can get very annoying quite quickly because their resources are going to be drained pretty quick if you're putting the pressure on them in the right ways with that configuration and all the duels you'll be having. Getting to the back of Damian's card, his melee attack is called Runic Blade. The target suffers 2, 3, 5 damage, and this model heals 1. One of the reasons why I kind of confused with 3 was because Siphon Life is a trigger on here. So if you hit a ram, when resolving, the target suffers +1 damage, and this model heals 1. So with the configuration, it's not too difficult to make this reliably a 3, 4, 6 damage swing, and this is stat 6 against defense, so it's pretty respectable. Damian can get in the mix and slap if he needs to. Next, we have Esoteric Debate. It's a range 10 attack action. It doesn't have a ranged icon on it, though, so Damian can take this action while he's engaged and target something outside of his engagement. It kind of goes over those rules for targeting with when you have the little gun icon next to your range. It's stat 6 against willpower, and the target suffers 2, 3 blast, 5 blast damage. The target gains injured +1 if there is at least one card of value 9 or greater in your configuration. Additionally, we have the Drain Magic trigger on Crows, where the target discards a card, and this model can draw a card and then discard a card. We also have the Draw Out Secrets trigger on Tomes that states drop a scheme marker into base contact with the target. I really like the versatility of having a willpower attack and a defense attack on my master. The triggers on this one are pretty nice as well. With you have to think about the triggers within the framework of the configuration, where it's not too difficult to get these things to happen, even if you were just trying to activate early with some of your other Witness models to start building up Crows, start draining your opponent's cards out of their hand with the Drain Magic trigger, and then with Maintain Order, you're really limiting what they can do. It is not difficult to really put your opponent under some activation pressure and make them think a lot about the resources that they've got to use. I think that's kind of Damian's overarching thing, is he just exerts a lot of board pressure and control on the opponent. The last attack action he has is a bonus action called Knowledge is Power. It is also a 10-inch range attack without the gun icon, so we have the same kind of targeting benefits as Esoteric Debate, but it is a stat 6 on willpower and states choose a suit. For each card of the chosen suit in your configuration, the target suffers 1 irreducible damage to a maximum of 3. It also has the Expose Flaws trigger on masks that has a stipulation for non-master only. Until the end phase, the target cannot reduce damage through effects other than stone, So it kind of messes with henchmen or anyone else who has the use soulstone ability, but just having a fairly reliable irreducible 3 damage on a master is pretty nuts as a bonus action. And on top of that, because we're talking, if Damian really wants to get down to business, he can easily run 1 round most models in the game, which I don't think is a feature of many control style masters, at least within my lexicon of playing a control style game. In other war games, you're usually not seeing a lot of damage come from them, but Damian exerts a lot of board control and also can put a lot of damage out there that your opponent really doesn't have a whole lot they can do about. Damian does bring 1 tactical action called Confiscated Lore. It's a stat 5 with a target number 12 that states once per activation, you look at the top 5 cards of your opposing player's fate deck and can discard any number of them, placing the rest back in any order. With a tome trigger, you get Infinite Puzzle. You can discard up to 3 cards from the configuration to summon a puzzle box anywhere within 4 inches of this model. The puzzle box is his totem, which we'll get to soon. And then the final trigger on masks is Knight to E5. For each card discarded, this model may choose a friendly witness model within line of sight, and all chosen models can push up to 2 inches in any direction. So Confiscated Lore is something that I will typically trigger off every turn, especially when I've got the pressure on my opponent to where I've drained a lot of the cards in their hand. Just being able to make sure that a lot of the duels fail, you can kind of pick and choose your battles to make sure that, they're not going to get a really good activation next. And you have 1 trigger is almost something you want to get off as soon as possible with getting your puzzle box into play, but the Knight to E5 can also exert a lot of pressure in kind of shuffling the board up a little bit. When you combine that with the Memories of the Yellow Crypt ability, you're getting a lot of maneuverability. Again, it's more so kind of leaning into this idea that Damian really can manipulate the board the way he wants to. So coming off Confiscated Lore is the puzzle box. This is Damian's Enforcer Totem. It has Defense 4, Willpower 6, Move 4, and Size 1. It has Armor +1 that will just reduce all damage suffered by this model by +1. It has House the Soul. During the end phase, when cards from your configuration are added back to the discard pile, this model may choose one of those cards to keep in the configuration. So I think that's something that I glazed over with the configuration, is that you don't get to choose certain cards to stick around in your configuration unless you have some of these House the Soul models. At the end of during the end phase, your configuration clears and you get that shuffled back into your deck like you normally would with all your other cards. The puzzle box isn't the only model in Damian's keyword that has House the Soul, but it is nice to be able to get that early on. So that's why I like to make sure that I try and get it as soon as possible, like turn 1, turn 2 at the latest. The model is insignificant and has the repository ability as well, so when it activates, it just chucks a card from your control hand to add to the configuration, and then you draw. It does have 3 health. I think with Damian, I went over the fact that he's got 11, so he's not like the most survivable thing in the universe, but he does get access to a lot of shielded. Maintain order keeps him pretty safe. 11 is respectable. But the 3-box totem, it's a summon. It's tiny. It actually, with Armor +1 and the shielded abilities, it kind of sticks around more than what you would think it would. So deceptively, I wouldn't say tanky. It's solid in terms of survivability. Getting to the back of the puzzle box card, we have nothing but tactical actions here. The first one is kind of it's loaded. It's called Rework the Configuration. It's range 6, and it does not have any target number or stat or anything. You just do this. It states once per turn, swap up to 3 cards in your control hand with cards in your configuration. For each card added to your configuration this way, resolve the following effects based on the suit of the card. For crows, you get Harmful Mark. That states an enemy model within range must pass a TN11 willpower duel or suffer 2 damage. The ram gives you Terraforming Mark. You move any marker within range up to 2 inches. The tomes give you Shielding Mark. That states a friendly witness model within range may gain shielded +1. Then on masks, you get Swift Mark. That states a friendly witness model within range may move up to 2. So the thing that I like about this is that it takes it can take low value cards that are in your hand and make sure that they have an effect. Like Damian is a person who can really contort his resources. So if you have like 2s, 3s, and 4s in your hand, as long as they're different suits, you can kind of pick up high value cards from your configuration and then throw the little ones back in to get all these cool little triggers that can happen. And they all are impactful, right? Like a willpower 11 duel doesn't seem like the worst thing in the universe, but when you're putting a lot of pressure on your opponent's resources, it's really not easy for them to kind of make the decision to just pass that if they're flipping bad cards. Rework the confiscated lore can help you get there too, but the other thing about this is you can take the high value cards from your configuration, put them back in your hand, so you can start triggering the memories of the yellow crypt, so you can start moving and shielding your models as you need to. So rework the configuration outside of just getting those cool triggers has a lot of implications in how you can manipulate the configuration and the board state in general. Next up is a very straightforward action called Simple Solution. Range 6, stat 4, target number 10. Once per turn, friendly witness model only. If the target costs 7 or less, it gains fast. Otherwise, it gains focused. Both of these conditions are really good, and whether it's going on your henchmen getting focused or your minions getting fast, they can go to the places they need to get the jobs done that they need to do. For a bonus action, we have the Box Opens. This is Aura 6. Or Pulse 6, I think it's Pulse 6. Stat 4. The target number is 14, so it's pretty beefy on this one, but enemy models within range must pass a target number 14 willpower duel or suffer 2 damage and gain stunned. This is a pretty... I feel like it's a little bonkers when you actually start playing it on the table. You do put a lot of... I keep on saying it, but I can't stress it enough. You put a lot of pressure on your opponent's resources with this particular crew, and just getting your puzzle box out there in the middle and throwing out a target number 14 willpower duel to something that's bricking together or bubbling together, I guess is the Malifaux term that people use. This can really hurt your opponent quite a bit. I don't worry too much about needing to hit a 10 because you do have the configuration that can help you out here. Since the puzzle box is a witness model, it can cheat from the configuration by discarding cards. So this is not something that is really hard to achieve in terms of being able to make sure that this goes off. You're not just relying on the top of your deck or what's in your fate hand. You might have some things in the configuration that can help you out. So overall, I think the puzzle box is an extremely important part of Damian's crew, and I try to summon it as early as possible. Next up, we have Bellaventine Thorpe stepping in as Damian's henchman. She comes in at 9 cost with defense 6, willpower 5, movement 5, and size 2. On the front of her card, she has the ability Arcane Shield 2, so during the start phase, she gets shielded +2. She also brings along Deadly Pursuit that states during the end phase, this model may push up to 4 inches. A Guild Deserter is another ability on her card that states enemy models within 5 must each discard a card to take the Concentrate action. We also have Repository that states when this model activates, it may add a card from its control hand to your configuration to draw a card. That's just a standard witness. Well, no, I shouldn't say standard witness thing, but she has it. Also, we have Right Side of the Law. When this model activates, for each ram card in your configuration, a different friendly model within line of sight may heal 1 to a maximum of 3 models. She comes in at 9 health, so off the bat on the front of her card, she's a pushy piece, she's a supportive piece, and she can be a little bit more manipulative with the Guild Deserter ability, stating that they have to discard a card to take the Concentrate action. Oftentimes, focused is one of the better ways to try and deal with some of the pressures that Damian puts on your opponent's resources. But having Belaventine Thorpe kind of up in the middle, being very survivable and very annoying with Guild Deserter, can make it so that they really don't get to take that advantage of having focused through the concentrate action. On the backside of Belaventine's card, we have the Runic Blade, which is the same attack as Damian has, but has a couple different triggers here. So at range 1, stat 6 against defense, the target suffers 2/3/5 damage, and this model heals 1. The Crow trigger is Drain Magic, so they discard a card, and this model draws a card, then discard a card. So you get that that pressure again from trying to drain cards out of their hand. And the configuration is something, like I said, you really need to think about your triggers in relation to the configuration, because you're really hitting your triggers is extremely reliable. You also have the Ram trigger for Ignition that states immediately models within 2 of this model gain burning +2. This trigger can be interesting sometimes because typically I have Belaventine kind of sitting around my own models, and she's kind of being the bodyguard in that situation. But Ignition can kind of hurt you if you're trying to burn your own models, which this crew doesn't really have any synergies with getting burning on yourself. Maybe if you're looking at maybe Damian 2, it gets a little different, but Ignition is just one of those things. It's cool when you get it, but it's not something that you lean into. Next, she has Arcane Firearm, which is a 12-inch ranged attack with the gun icon, and has stat 6 against defense. The target suffers 2/3/4 damage. If the target has willpower 6 or greater, it gains stunned. With the Crow trigger, we have Prioritize, where you choose a card in your configuration and add it to your control hand. The attack actions that Belaventine Thorpe brings are quite versatile. It's only the 2, but she's got a decent melee attack and a good ranged attack that can create conditions and pull some things out of your configuration if you happen to need them. One of the things that can happen is with adding cards to your configuration and discarding cards to cheat, you can sometimes find yourself with less cards in your hand because of being able to, it essentially would cost you 2 cards to cheat from the configuration, the one that came from the configuration and the one you discarded. So being able to just pick up a card randomly from your configuration when you're on 0 cards in hand can be pretty helpful. So don't sleep on Prioritize. Sometimes it's just what you need to keep the engine rolling. For tactical actions, we first bring along Outmaneuver. It's range 6, stat 5, target number 10. Up to 2 friendly models within range can push up to 3 inches. And then the Ram trigger has Conflicted Morals. That states once per turn, 1 other friendly non-master witness model that move this way can take a non-bonus action. Outmaneuver is really fun. It's just more ways of trying to shuffle things around the board and then getting some cool out of activation actions. Outmaneuver is just, it's a neat ability when you can get it to go off and put the action that you need in the right place. For her bonus action, we've got I've Got Your Back. It's range 6, stat 5, target number 10. Target other engaged friendly model. Target is placed into base contact with this model. The Tome trigger gives us magical dampening. Until the end phase, enemy models cannot declare triggers in an opposed duel with the target. So the fun thing with I've Got Your Back with Belaventine Thorpe is that you do get a lot of maneuverability with this crew, with the pushes from Damian and the pushes from Outmaneuver, and some of the other, like the dabblers can move a little fast too. But I've Got Your Back can be a little bit more of an extender if your opponent's engaging you early to get Belaventine in the mix, or she can stop paying attention to a certain area that she's been paying attention to and then snap to area where the fight's happening. Magical dampening can be a real strain on your opponent as well, in that triggers are very important in Malifaux, and being able to, you're kind of de-incentivizing your opponent to attacking the thing that you've gone into base contact, that the model you've pulled to with I've Got Your Back, because if they can't declare their triggers, they're not getting that extra they're not getting that extra force from the attacks that they're doing, so they kind of have to focus into Bellaventine Thorpe. And with Arcane Shield +2, it can be a real pain in the butt to deal with her on top of all the shielded that you can be handing out. So she's kind of like a bodyguard without really being a bodyguard. To round out Damian's core box, we get 3 Dabblers as his minions. They are cost 5, have the Witness and Whizbang keyword, are defense 5, willpower 5, move 5, and size 2. On the front of their card, they have the ability Arcane Shield +1. They have Repository, so they are able to restock our configuration. They are blast resistant +1, so they reduce all damage this model suffers from Shockwave, pulse, and blast effects by +1. They have Unexpected Outcome, which states once per activation, after this model fails a duel generated by itself or an enemy model, it gains a glowy token and may add the top card of its discard pile to your configuration. Finally, we have Before the Storm, that states when this model takes the Lightning Strike action, it may discard 2 glowy tokens to increase that Shockwave value by +1. They also have 5 health, so they're not extremely survivable, but with Arcane Shield and Shielded, the amount of surprise survivability in this crew is pretty high. Unexpected Outcome is probably one of the things to pay the most attention to on the front of this card. The glowy token thing is cool. If you're trying to throw out a bunch of duels, because we do have a Shockwave attack coming later, it's nice to be able to stack up these glowy tokens or maybe fail some duels that aren't really all that big of a deal or impactful. But the big thing is being able to pull cards from your discard pile into your configuration. Sometimes it's not that great because if you're failing your duel, it's not an amazing card you're putting in, but since we're getting triggers baked in based on how many cards we actually have of a suit in the configuration, this can be an interesting way to cheat in a specific card to get a suit so that you're able to get those triggers throughout the rest of your crew without any issues. So Unexpected Outcome is one that takes a little bit of finesse to use, but it's more than just get glowy token, make big blast. On the back of the Dabbler's card, we get 2 attack actions, the first of which is Elemental Bolt. That's a range 10 attack with the gun icon, so I think Damian's the only one in this crew who really gets any of those non-ranged attacks. But it's stat 5 against defense. The target suffers 2, 3, 4 damage and brings the trigger on tomes called Strong Winds. You push the target up to 2 inches away from this model for each tome in the action's final duel total up to a maximum of 6. So remember that if we're with this one in particular, you can get a tome from the configuration and then a tome from the card you flip, so you can get people pushed up. You can get people pushed pretty far on this one, depending on how things are looking. You also have the Crow trigger for From Mountain to Valley. If your configuration has any cards of value 5 or 6, the target gains stunned. If the target is already stunned, it instead suffers 1 damage. So some cards in Damian's crew will want to pay attention to specific values, but 5 or 6 is, if you really are looking for this trigger to stun people, you can go for it. I haven't used it much, but I guess I just don't like going through the hoops of trying to get those specific cards in. I'm always focusing on the big cards, but I'm sure some other people might value this a lot more than I do. Next up, we have Lightning Strike. That's another ranged attack at 8 inches. Stat is 7, and the target number is 13. And it's a Shockwave 1 with a move 13 duel, and damage 2 for failing. The Crow trigger is Practice Makes Perfect. For each card with an odd value in your configuration, you can look at the top card of your Fate deck, and then you can discard any non-jokers that you looked at this way. So this just thins out your deck to make sure you're not whiffing on bad cards. It's kind of like the opposite of Confiscated Lore. But Confiscated Lore I typically use to look at my opponent's deck anyways. Well, yeah, because you can only look at the opposing player. So don't pay attention to me. This is just the Practice Makes Perfect just helps you get through your deck a little bit. You can tell I haven't used that trigger because typically I'm using the Remake the Earth trigger on tomes that states once per turn when resolving, after dropping a Shockwave marker, you drop a scheme marker into base contact with it. So this crew can get pretty schemy. with these attacks. Like, my dabblers are usually kind of they're scheme runners for me, and a big reason for that is the tactical action that they bring called Ride the Etheric Currents. This is a bonus action for them at stat 5, target number 10, that states push this model up to 2 inches in any direction, ignoring terrain. This model may push up to an additional inch for every card with a value of 9 or greater in your configuration. The mask trigger brings Washed Away, that states remove any number of markers this model moved through with this action. So Ride the Etheric Currents is a really fun scheme action in general. It can be a threat extender at its very minimum level, but when you're looking at trying to get up the table to get into certain positions to start either pushing your wagon, kicking your can, whatever you want to call it, being able to get an extra move, especially like you think about put a 9 in the configuration for repository, move the dabbler 2 inches. Now you've got an extra inch that comes to Ride the Etheric Current, so you're moving 5 inches before you even really activate. I mean, you activate, but before you use any of your actions. So doing something like getting that 5-inch move outside of your normal actions, then taking another 5 inches to then still have an action to interact is really nice with the dabblers themselves. And being able to destroy markers that you move through, you're able to, sometimes it can be a little fiddly to have to try and get into range of a marker to remove it by hand. So just using Ride the Etheric Currents to not have to worry about it and just move over the objective and get rid of it without having to put any stress on your actions is pretty nice. So I do like the dabblers quite a bit in the Witness keyword. So when you're looking to expand out in a Damian crew, there are, with Gen Con, I'm pretty sure they released his entire keyword that hit with those, and Living Soulstones is a box that's not bad to go after. You end up getting access to 3 new minions that are the Soulstone Gammon, and one of the big things about these is that they're the other model that brings the House the Soul ability, so they allow you to keep cards in your configuration. They bring some decent healing, and they can put out injured at range. They're pretty decent in general for just a 4-point dude that can just keep the cards in your config. I like having 1 or 2 of these in most of my lists that I play. But the other model that comes in here is another henchman, and that's going to be Lohith. For 10 Soulstones, you, instead of getting Bellaventine Thorpe, where she's a little bit more maneuverable and supporty through combat, Lohith is more punchy and supporty through healing and resources. So he has quite a few different ways to heal models within the crew, but then also has some ways to try and get Soulstones back into your pool based on pitching cards from your configuration. So I think if you're doing something like Lohith, he just kind of plays a little bit more of a straightforward or supporty game than Thorpe does, where she's kind of like I don't know, she's just a little bit more I don't want to say tricky because that's not really her thing, but she isn't just a 3, 4, 6 damage that steals Soulstones. So, or I guess doesn't steal them, he adds them. But the Living Soulstone box is definitely something that's worthwhile getting to expand Damian's crew out. In the Invisible Ink box, I wanted to pay some special attention to Legerdemain. He's a living enforcer for the Witness keyword at Soulstone cost, or at Soulstone cost 7, whatever. He costs 7. But the thing for him is he has some really interesting scheming potential because he brings False Claim along with Disillusion as a bonus action, where Disillusion can just push models around, and with the Phantasmal Doorway trigger, you get to ignore terrain when moving your opponent's models, and that can help get them out of position and kind of set you up for False Claim. He doesn't do a ton of damage, but he does really annoy your opponent in that he's manipulative, and while you're within 4, you can't take any bonus actions. He also has the Showmanship ability, which can get really taxing on your opponent, where during opposed duels, this model flips face down and always cheats Fate's second. This model's flip is revealed after the other model has cheated Fate or chosen not to do so. Legerdemain can just really be an annoying piece in the middle of the table, and with your ability to move a lot of things outside of their activation with Damian, and adding cards to the configuration, you can make sure that you're getting Legerdemain up the table to be annoying before he even activates, to keep kind of taking advantage of those things. And if your opponent ignores him, then he just kind of runs schemes all over the place and kind of pushes your opponent's models out of position. A neat ability that he has is called Mirror Trick. So during the end phase, for each mass card in your configuration up to a max of 3, you can move a friendly scheme marker in line of sight up to 1 inch. So if your opponent if maybe your false claim, you put one that's a little bit more out of position for your opponent to get to deal with, so you remove the one that they can get to, or maybe they've removed it themselves, but you keep the one that's far off back and then move it into the position that you want to with Mirror Trick. So I think if you're wanting to play a little bit more schemy, Legerdemain is a really interesting piece to include in your list. Overall, I think Damian Ravencroft is a really interesting master. He definitely takes some getting used to in order to manage all of the different things that start at the beginning of each model's activation or trigger off when you do certain things with the configuration. Even Legerdemain has an ability that wants you to have a 1 inside the configuration. And it's just on a trigger, so it's not like he needs it, but it's there. There's just a lot to balance with Damian's crew, but it doesn't take a lot to make your opponent feel like they're having a really difficult time trying to prioritize what to do against Damian, because I think Damian is the type of master that just doesn't let your opponent do what they want to do without any consequence or any sacrifice. And I think that's where your opponents start to kind of chunk up on what it is that they need to really prioritize and make sure that they need to get done, because even when they have done that, they've like figured out what they need to make sure succeeds and put the effort into trying to make that happen. They still have to take into consideration what your configuration looks like and say, okay, well, they've got that 13 or 12 sitting in there, so at any point, if they want this action to fail, it will. Especially when you're doing something like maintain order, they're taking a second activation and discarding the card, and then you're using big cards to stop that from happening. It just costs them a lot of resources without any real gain out of it, other than just getting a card out of your configuration, which you can get back either through like Miya Murakami, who we didn't talk about, but it's just not difficult for you to use those resources and then try and get them back or recover a little bit quicker. And even when you don't have great cards in your configuration, like if you're stacking it up to make it look like the configuration is a little bit weak and you're really just playing the trigger game, your opponent doesn't really know if that means your hand is junk or if your hand is full of good cards. So you can play a lot of mind games with your opponent with a Damian crew. I think Damian's crew is a great example of how Wyrd just finds new ways to really interact with their game. Damian is a deep cut from some of the early lore from Malifaux, and bringing him back in such a way to where he really does some new things that the game hasn't seen quite yet is just really... it's a good example of how Wyrd interacts with their lore and can still make continual improvements or modifications to their game to bring the user a unique experience. So overall, I think I've gotten maybe 6 games with Damian under my belt so far, so I feel like I'm doing pretty well with him in general. I haven't gotten too confused on a lot of the things that he does, but he's definitely a master where I think like bare minimum you want to play like 5 games before you start understanding exactly how the machine runs. It's a lot to pay attention to, but once you get it, I think Damian's a really fun master for you to play, but can be a very unfun master for your opponent to play against because they have way too many decisions, and he does not let your opponent play in the sprinkler. So let me know what you think about Damian in the comments section below, and if you're interested in trying to direct me into what master I should talk about next in this format, I'd be interested in hearing what you all have to say as well. But thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.